The piercing screams cut through the pouring rain like knives. Josiah Thompson slammed on the brakes of his old pickup truck hard, hammering, as he spotted two young boys clinging desperately to a fallen log in the raging floodwaters of the Susquehanna River just outside his hometown of Milford, Pennsylvania. Without a second thought, he yanked off his jacket, kicked off his boots, and plunged into the icy current, the cold hitting him like a wall, but the cries of the terrified kids, Ethan and Noah, pushing him forward. He reached the first boy, Noah, the older one at 12 years old, grabbed his arm and fought the pull of the water, shouting encouragement as he towed him toward the muddy bank, then turned back for Ethan, the 10-year-old who was slipping under the surface. His muscles burned, his lungs screamed, but Josiah hauled the younger boy up, coughing and sputtering, both kids safe on solid ground just as the volunteer firefighters arrived, sirens blaring through the storm. At the hospital, the boys, wrapped in blankets, looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes, their mother, Lisa, arriving in tears, hugging Josiah, so tight he could barely breathe. She kept saying, "You saved my sons, you are a hero," while doctors checked the kids for hypothermia and minor cuts. Then the door opened, and in walked Samuel, their father, a tall man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and a worried frown, still wearing his button-down from the office in the next county over. Samuel shook Josiah's hands firmly, eyes meeting in a way that sent an unexpected jolt through the mechanic. "Thank you does not begin to cover it," Samuel said, voice thick with emotion. "I was on my way back from a work meeting when Lisa called. I cannot imagine what would have happened without you." Josiah shrugged it off, saying anyone would have done the same, but inside his chest tightened because for years he had lived quietly in this conservative town, running his auto shop, keeping his head down and his heart locked away. That night back at his small apartment above the garage, Josiah could not sleep, the image of Samuel's face lingering the way his hand had lingered just a second too long in that handshake. He thought about his own life, the family that had turned their backs when he came out at 18, the lonely nights, the fear of what the town would say if they knew the truth about the man who fixed their cars. The rescue had pulled him into something bigger than a simple good deed, and as the rain finally eased outside, he wondered if this moment would fade, or if it had already cracked open the door to a life he had stopped believing was possible for him. The next morning, the local paper called, wanting a story, "Hero Mechanic Saves Local Boys," but Josiah declined the interview, preferring to stay invisible. At the shop, he worked on an old Chevy, trying to lose himself in the familiar smell of oil and metal, but his mind kept drifting to the hospital, to Samuel, grateful eyes, to the boys safe because of him. Around noon, Lisa stopped by with a homemade pie, and the boys in tow, Ethan and Noah, shy at first, then chattering about how cool it was that Josiah was a real-life superhero. Samuel arrived shortly after, picking them up from a checkup, his presence filling the small office with a quiet energy that made Josiah aware of every movement he made. They talked easily about the storm, the river, how the boys had been playing too close to the edge despite warnings. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, admitting, "I try to be there for them every day, but work pulls me away sometimes, and days like yesterday remind me how fragile everything is." Josiah nodded, understanding more than he let on, because his own life felt fragile too, built on secrets and careful distances. As they left, Samuel turned back at the door and said, "Maybe we can grab coffee sometime just to talk properly, no rush." Josiah said sure, trying to sound casual, but his pulse quickened in a way he had not felt in years. That afternoon, as he closed the shop, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and he stood in the lot looking at the river in the distance, knowing that one rescue had already started to change everything, even if he did not yet understand how deeply. Weeks passed, and the friendship between Josiah and Samuel grew in small, steady steps that felt both natural and terrifying. Samuel brought his car in for a routine tune-up, and while Josiah worked under the hood, they talked about fatherhood, about how Samuel had raised the boys mostly on his own after their mother passed away when Noah was only 4. "It was a quiet kind of loss," Samuel explained, voice steady but eyes distant, "and the boys mean the world to me. I wanted to grow up feeling safe and loved no matter what." Josiah listened, wiping grease from his hands, feeling a pull toward this man who carried so much responsibility, yet still found space for kindness. He shared bits of his own story growing up in Milford, the auto shop passed down from an uncle who had been more like a father than his own parents ever were. When Samuel asked about family, Josiah hesitated, then said they are not really in the picture anymore, and left it at that, afraid to say more. The boys started hanging around the shop after school, helping with small tasks like handing tools or sweeping the floor, their laughter filling the space that had always been too quiet. Ethan asked endless questions about engines, while Noah drew pictures of cars on scrap paper, and Josiah found himself smiling more than he had in months. One evening, Samuel invited him over for dinner at their modest house on the edge of town, lasagna on the table, the boys excited to show off their treehouse in the backyard. Over the meal, conversation flowed easily from school stories to favorite movies, And for the first time in forever, Josiah felt seen not as the mechanic, not as the hero, but as himself. Later on the porch with coffee in hand, Samuel said quietly, "You know, the day you saved them, it was like the universe sent someone who understood what it means to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves." Josiah's heart skipped because in that moment, he wondered if Samuel could see the parts of him he kept hidden, the parts that yearned for connection beyond friendship. They sat in comfortable silence watching the fireflies dance under the summer sky, and Josiah realized the rescue had not just saved the boys, it had pulled him toward a light he had long avoided. As the weeks turned into months, their coffee meetups became regular, the conversations deeper, touching on dreams and regrets. Samuel admitting he sometimes felt overwhelmed balancing work and parenting alone, Josiah confessing the loneliness of his quiet life. The attraction simmered unspoken but real in the way their eyes held a second longer, in the way Samuel's hand brushed Josiah's arm when passing a tool or a plate. Yet the town conservative heart beat steadily around them, whispers starting about the single dad and mechanic spending so much time together, but neither man acknowledged it, yet both feeling the weight of what it could mean if the truth came out. The closeness between Josiah and Samuel deepened as autumn painted the Pennsylvania hills in fiery reds and golds. They took the boys on a weekend hike along the river trail, the same waters that had nearly claimed them, now calm and reflective. Ethan and Noah raced ahead laughing, while the two men walked side by side talking about everything and nothing. Samuel opened up about the years after losing his wife, how he had thrown himself into raising the boys, pushing aside his own feelings because being a dad came first. "I never really let myself think about what I wanted for me," he said, voice low, "but I am starting to wonder if that was fair to any of us." Josiah felt the words resonate deep inside because he had done the same, hiding who he was to protect his shop, his reputation, the fragile peace he had carved out. That night after the boys were asleep, they sat by the fireplace, Samuel's house warm and inviting, and Josiah took a chance, sharing more than he ever had. "I am gay," he said simply, the words hanging in the air for a moment before Samuel nodded slowly and said, "Me too, though I have never said it out loud to many people, especially not here in Milford." The admission hung between them like a bridge, finally crossed, both men breathing easier yet aware of the risks. The following weekend, Samuel's family visited from out of town, his sister and her husband, conservative folks, who praised Josiah as the hero who saved the boys but eyed the growing friendship with subtle suspicion. During dinner, the conversation turned to town values and family traditions, and Josiah felt the familiar knot in his stomach, the fear of judgment rising. Samuel noticed, and later in the kitchen, he squeezed Josiah's shoulder, saying, "You do not have to carry that alone anymore." Those words planted a seed of hope but also fear, because with closeness came the possibility of pain. Back at the shop the next week, a regular customer made an offhand comment about single dads needing real men around, and Josiah brushed it off, but the words stung, reminding him of the world outside their private moments. Yet the bond strengthened through small acts, Josiah helping Samuel fix a leaky roof, the boys joining for movie nights where laughter echoed and walls slowly crumbled. Samuel started to show his feelings in quiet ways, a lingering hug, a shared look across the room, and Josiah allowed himself to hope that maybe love could find a place, even in a town that seemed determined to keep secrets buried. Winter arrived with its crisp air and early snowfalls, turning Milford into a postcard that hid the tensions brewing beneath. The turning point came during a weekend camping trip with the boys in the nearby state park tents, pitched by a frozen lake, the four of them roasting marshmallows under a clear, starry sky. Ethan and Noah fell asleep early, exhausted from snowball fights, and Josiah and Samuel sat by the fire, talking late into the night. The conversation shifted from light topics to the heavy ones, Samuel admitting the pull he felt toward Josiah had grown into something he could no longer ignore. "I have spent so long putting the boys first," he said, "but being with you makes me want more for all of us." In the firelight, their hands found each other, and the first kiss happened soft, tentative, full of years of unspoken longing, both men pulling back to search each other's eyes for regret and finding only certainty. The moment felt like the rescue all over again, life-saving in its own way. Yet the internal conflict surged the next morning as they packed up, Josiah's mind racing with what ifs. What if the boys sensed the change? What if the town found out? Samuel reassured him with a quiet promise, "We take it slow for them and for us," but the kiss had unlocked a door neither could close. Back in town, the relationship deepened in stolen moments, coffee runs turned into handholds in the truck, late-night texts that made Josiah smile despite the fear. The boys noticed the happiness in their dad and in their hero uncle figure, as they called him, asking innocent questions that tested the men's boundaries. One evening, a misunderstanding arose when a neighbor saw them leaving the shop together and mentioned it casually to Lisa, who asked Samuel about it innocently enough. Samuel handled it smoothly, but the incident highlighted the tightrope they walked. Josiah found himself confronting his own identity crisis in the mirror, wondering if loving Samuel meant risking everything. He had built the shop, the quiet life, the safety of invisibility. Samuel faced his own struggles balancing fatherhood with newfound feelings, afraid that coming out fully could complicate custody or the boys' stability in their small community. Yet the love grew stronger through those challenges, each man choosing the other in small, brave ways that built towards something lasting. The climax of that season came when Josiah invited Samuel and the boys to his apartment for a simple holiday meal, the four of them decorating a small tree, laughter filling the space, and for the first time Josiah felt like he belonged somewhere beyond the shadows. As spring thawed, the Pennsylvania ground conflicts that had simmered began to surface, testing the foundation Josiah and Samuel had built. Town gossip started quietly, at first a customer at the garage joking about the mechanic, and the single dad becoming besties, then turning sharper with questions about why Samuel spent so much time at the shop. Josiah brushed it off, focusing on work, but the pressure mounted when his part-time helper quit, suddenly muttering something about not wanting to be associated with certain lifestyles. Samuel faced his own battles at the school board meeting, where a parent complained about the boys spending time with Josiah, hinting at inappropriate influences, though nothing was said outright. The misunderstanding exploded one afternoon when an old friend of Josiah from high school who had moved away but was visiting spread a rumor after seeing them at a park together, the friend assuming and then sharing that Josiah was corrupting a family man. Samuel pulled back, temporarily overwhelmed by a call from his in-laws questioning his choices and the potential impact on the boys. Josiah felt the betrayal like a punch, the sacrifice of his own peace to protect Samuel, and the kids leading him to take the blame, publicly saying it was just friendship, nothing more, even as his heart ached. The difficulties highlighted their internal struggles, Josiah wrestling with the fear that his love would destroy the very family he had helped save, Samuel confronting the prejudice that made him question if authenticity was worth the risk. Yet in a quiet moment at the river, where it all began, they met again, Samuel apologizing for pulling away, and Josiah admitting his own doubts. They chose to face the storm together, discussing how to shield the boys while staying true to themselves, the conversation deep and raw, full of the kind of emotional honesty that strengthened their bond. The town continued its subtle pressures, but the men grew more determined, each small act of defiance a step toward freedom. Lisa, sensing the truth, sat down with Samuel and offered quiet support, surprising them both and giving hope that not everyone would turn away. Through it all, the boys remained the bright center, Ethan and Noah thriving under the care of both men, their innocent acceptance a reminder of what really mattered. The crisis peaked during the annual town fair when a public confrontation forced everything into the open. Josiah and Samuel had brought the boys for games and rides, trying to keep things normal, but a group of locals, including the former friend, cornered Josiah near the Ferris wheel, accusing him of influencing Samuel and the family in ways that went against town values. The argument grew, heated voices rising as Samuel stepped in, defending their relationship with a firmness that surprised even him, declaring that love and heroism should not be questioned. The boys watched wide-eyed from a distance, and Josiah's heart broke at the fear in their faces, but he stood his ground, sacrificing his reputation in the moment by refusing to deny the truth. The betrayal cut deep, the friend who had once been trusted now leading the charge, but it also sparked an awakening in both men. Samuel realized in that chaos that hiding had cost him too much already, while Josiah saw that protecting the boys meant showing them strength and authenticity, not fear. The aftermath was messy, whispers turning to open stares at the shop, customers canceling appointments, Lisa fielding calls from worried relatives. Yet the crisis brought clarity, Samuel and Josiah spending long nights talking through the pain, the sacrifices, the way one heroic rescue had led to this bigger fight for their future. They chose to prioritize the relationship, even as it meant Josiah temporarily closing the shop early some days to avoid conflict. The emotional toll was real, tears and doubts, but also breakthroughs where they held each other, promising that the love born from crisis would endure. The boys asked questions in their innocent way, and the men answered with honesty, age-appropriate and full of reassurance that family came in many forms. Through the storm, they emerged closer, the climax of the confrontation becoming the catalyst for deeper commitment. Sacrifice and awakening defined the following months as Josiah and Samuel navigated the fallout with courage and grace. Josiah's parents, who had been distant for years, heard the rumors and reached out with a painful call, demanding he end the relationship or lose any chance of reconciliation. The rejection stung, reminding him of old wounds, but this time he chose differently, standing firm in his love for Samuel and the boys. Samuel fought his own battles with the in-laws who threatened to complicate visitation, but he stood his ground, explaining that his happiness strengthened his fatherhood, not threatened it. The emotional confrontations were intense, late-night arguments with family members, tearful admissions and moments of raw vulnerability where both men questioned if the cost was too high. Yet the awakening came in waves, Josiah realizing that the rescue had not just saved the boys, it had saved him from a life half-lived, Samuel understanding that true love required risking everything for the right reasons. They supported each other through the hard days, Josiah helping Samuel with the boys' homework, and routine Samuel encouraging Josiah to reopen the shop with a new sign that symbolized fresh starts. Friends who mattered stayed loyal, offering quiet solidarity, and the community slowly shifted, some residents reaching out with unexpected kindness. The growth was profound, both men maturing in their identity, embracing who they were without apology, the sacrifices forging a bond unbreakable. One evening by the river again, they renewed their commitment, hands clasped, eyes clear, with the knowledge that their journey had transformed them into better versions of themselves, fathers, partners, and men unafraid. Reconciliation bloomed as summer returned to Milford, the town slowly accepting the new reality through small acts of normalcy. The shop thrived again, customers returning with nods of respect, the boys excelling in school, confident in their expanded family. Josiah and Samuel built a life together, blending households carefully, with the boys blessing their love openly and joyfully. The journey from rescue to romance had been marked by every conflict, misunderstanding, and sacrifice, but it led to a profound growth where both men stood taller in their truth, supporting each other through the remaining challenges with unwavering love. Family ties mended in time, even Josiah's parents sending a tentative card that hinted at future conversations. The four of them, Ethan, Noah, Samuel, and Josiah, became a unit defined not by the crisis that brought them together, but by the daily choices to choose love over fear, authenticity over approval. As they sat on the porch one quiet evening watching the river flow peacefully, Josiah reflected on how one moment of courage had rippled into a lifetime of meaning. Samuel squeezed his hand, and the boys laughed in the yard, the scene a testament to resilience and human connection. In the end, their story proved that heroism comes in many forms, and that opening your heart can change not just one life but many. True or false, one act of bravery in saving others can lead to the greatest act of all, fully embracing who you are and the love you deserve despite every obstacle society places in your way.